In September 2020, 71-year-old Dale Hutchins bought the one tractor every farmer in the county warned him to avoid. They mocked him at the coffee shop and bet he wouldn't finish harvest. But when a brutal winter freeze struck and multi-$100,000 machinery broke down everywhere, Dale's cheap blue Outcast did something that left his biggest rival dead silent. There are purchases that make you the joke at the morning coffee shop, the kind of machinery buys that turn your name into a punchline before the ink on the bill of sale even has time to dry. In September 2020, 71-year-old Dale Hutchins made one of those exact purchases. It happened under the heavy, humid heat of a late summer farm dispersal auction in the heart of Randolph County, Illinois. The air smelled of diesel exhaust, fried concession food, and the quiet tension of 200 local row crop farmers waiting to bid on used iron. When the auctioneer called Lot 42, a bright blue 2012 New Holland T8.390 rolled up to the wooden grandstands. The machine was 8 years old, with 2,847 hours showing on the digital meter. Underneath that long hood sat an 8.7-liter Fiat Powertrain Technologies Cursor 9 engine, rated at 370 horsepower, paired to a continuous auto command transmission. The book value on a clean machine like that sat comfortably at €164,000. But in Randolph County, where the fields had been dominated by red Massey Ferguson paint for over 50 years, blue iron was considered an unwelcome intruder. The auctioneer began his rhythmic chant, calling for an opening bid of €100,000. Nobody raised a hand. The crowd of lifelong Massey Ferguson loyalists simply stared, some smirking, others shaking their heads. The silence dragged on for 10 brutal seconds. Most men in the crowd saw a tractor that would be a nightmare to find parts for when harvest hit its peak. But Dale, who had farmed 1,800 acres in the county for 42 years, saw something entirely different. He saw a long, heavy-duty wheelbase engineered for extreme pulling stability, a proven European-designed CVT, and an engine known for running cold and frugal under heavy load. When the auctioneer dropped the asking price down to $80,000, Dale didn't hesitate. He raised his yellow bidder card. One neighboring farmer gave a half-hearted counterbid at $85,000, just to test the room. Dale instantly raised his card again to €87,000. The auctioneer scanned the crowd, called 3 times for another bid, and slammed down the gavel. Sold. €87,000 for a 370 horsepower workhorse. The crowd murmured, but Dale just walked toward the clerk's trailer to sign the papers. He knew the neighbors were already talking, but he also knew that out in the dirt, performance always speaks louder than paint. By 3 o'clock that Friday afternoon, Dale was hauling his new acquisition down Route 150 on the back of a 3-axle lowboy trailer. The blue paint caught the bright autumn sun, standing out like a neon sign against the sea of green cornstalks lining the highway. Before he even reached his gravel driveway, 3 different pickup trucks had already slowed down as they passed his machine yard, their drivers leaning over the steering wheel to take a long, deliberate look. By Sunday morning, half the county knew. Dale Hutchins had brought home a New Holland, and in Randolph County, that was practically a declaration of war against tradition. Southern Illinois has been solid Massey Ferguson territory since the mid-1960s, when local dealerships established an ironclad grip on the agricultural market. The high-horsepower tractors working those heavy silt loam soils were red, from high-capacity combines to massive 4-wheel drive articulated rigs. If you farmed anywhere near the Mississippi River Basin and didn't run Massey Ferguson red, you were the odd man out. Outliers always got noticed, and they usually got mocked. Dale knew the rules because he had played by them his entire adult life. For over 4 decades, his machine shed had been filled with red iron, including a reliable older unit he'd bought used back in 2004 and another workhorse added in 2011. They were solid, predictable machines that never gave him a bad surprise when the weather turned cold. But the used machinery market had shifted dramatically over the previous 2 years. Dale had watched clean, 10-year-old Massey Ferguson tractors with 4,000 hours on the clock selling for well over €120,000 at regional auctions. Older models were regularly pulling €95,000 despite heavy wear. That kind of brand loyalty was great if you were selling off an estate, But it was absolute poison if you were a working farmer trying to manage operational costs on 1,800 acres. At 71 years old, Dale wasn't interested in maintaining a brand legacy or proving his loyalty to a local dealership board. He just needed pure, uninterrupted pulling power that wouldn't drain his bank account before the first load of grain hit the elevator. As he backed the T8.390 off the lowboy and parked it squarely in the center of his yard, he knew the local coffee shop crowd would have a field day. But numbers don't lie, and Dale was more than willing to let the numbers do the talking. The initial confrontation arrived precisely at 6:30 on Monday morning inside the break room of the local agricultural co-op. Dale had walked in to pick up a case of hydraulic oil and a fresh set of fuel filters, only to find 6 local operators huddled around the coffee machine. Among them was Billy Schaefer, a major operator farming 3,200 acres with a pair of high-horsepower Massey Ferguson tractors. As soon as Dale stepped through the glass doorway, the chatter stopped, replaced by a row of knowing smirks. Billy leaned back against the counter, crossed his arms, and shook his head with amused condescension. Word travels fast when someone buys a blue tractor at a dispersal sale, Billy announced, ensuring everyone in the room heard him. Dale, what on earth were you thinking buying that new Holland? You've been running red iron longer than most of these boys have been alive. Dale picked up his receipt from the counter, completely unbothered by the audience. He looked Billy square in the eye with a calm, even expression. I was thinking I bought a 370 horsepower tractor with less than 3,000 hours for 87,000 euros. Dale replied quietly. I was thinking that leaves about 70,000 euros sitting in my bank account instead of wrapped up in a red hood. Billy let out a dry laugh and gestured toward the window. That's fine until the middle of harvest when a computer sensor trips or a hydraulic line lets go. Good luck getting a field service tech out from 40 miles away when every dealer in this county carries red parts. You bought a parade piece, Dale. Nobody's going to touch that machine on a trade-in 3 years from now. The rest of the room stayed silent, nodding along with Billy's assessment. In their minds, equipment wasn't just a tool, it was a community identity, and step outside that boundary was asking for financial ruin. Dale didn't bother arguing about engine torque curves or transmission efficiency. He simply pocketed his receipt, grabbed his oil filters, and gave the group a polite nod. I've done the math, Billy, Dale said calmly as he pushed open the heavy door. If it breaks, I'll fix it. But at 87,000, it's already paid for itself before it even touches the dirt. He walked out into the morning air, leaving the co-op crowd to their coffee, fully aware that the real test wouldn't happen at a sales counter, but 6 inches deep in heavy clay. What the coffee shop crowd failed to realize was that Dale hadn't bought a paint job. He had bought an engineering package. Long before raising his bidder card at the auction, he had spent weeks studying the technical specifications of the T8 series. The T8.390 was built on a massive long wheelbase frame, stretching nearly 11 feet between the axles. Unlike traditional designs where the engine sat directly over the front axle, the FPT engine on the T8 was set further back, integrated into a structural cast sump. This gave the tractor a natural 50-50 weight distribution without needing to stack thousands of pounds of cast iron weights on the front nose. Under the hood was the heart of machine, the 8.7-liter Fiat Powertrain Technologies Cursor 9 engine. FPT was an industrial powerhouse in Europe, engineering severe-duty diesel engines for marine applications, heavy construction equipment, and commercial haulers. Featuring a wastegate turbocharger, high-pressure common rail fuel injection, and 4 valves per cylinder, the Cursor 9 delivered a massive wave of low-end torque, peaking at over 1,500 foot-pounds. It was an engine designed to lug through heavy clay all day without spiking oil temperatures or consuming excessive fuel. Then there was the transmission. The Auto Command continuously variable system was built around 4 mechanical gear ranges seamlessly driven by a hydrostatic unit. By utilizing 4 mechanical points of 100% mechanical efficiency within the speed curve, the transmission minimized power loss through the hydraulics, transferring maximum ground horsepower directly to the massive rear duals. Whether crawling at half a mile per hour or roading at 30, the operator simply pushed the command arc controller, letting the tractor's central computer automatically match engine RPM to load demand. While his neighbors saw an oddball color scheme, Dale recognized high-tier industrial design. The heavy front axle suspension, high-capacity hydraulic pump pushing over 65 gallons per minute, and massive rear three-point hitch lift capacity were identical to systems found on machines costing twice as much. Dale had essentially secured enterprise-grade pulling stability, modern continuous power delivery, and a bulletproof heavy-duty powertrain for €87,000. As he checked the fluid levels and tightened the wheel lugs in his shed, he smiled. The engineering was rock solid, and autumn was about to prove it. October arrived in southern Illinois with crisp mornings, dry dust, and the relentless pressure of autumn corn harvest. Dale backed the blue New Holland T8.390 up to his 22-ton dual-auger grain cart, dropping the heavy hitch pin into place and snapping the hydraulic lines into the rear bank. His primary job for the next month was keeping the combine moving continuously, shuttling thousands of bushels of dry corn across rough, sun-baked clay fields to the semi-trucks parked along the gravel road. From the first pass across a 200-acre bottomland field, the difference in machine dynamics was striking. As the combine auger dumped 22 tons of grain into the cart on the move, the Cursor 9 engine didn't even drop pitch. The auto command transmission adjusted its internal hydrostatic pressure seamlessly, holding a steady 4 miles per hour through deep terraces without a single jerky gear change. The raw pulling power was smooth and continuous, maintaining momentum where traditional power shift transmissions would drop RPM and scrub speed. By the end of the first week, the operational numbers began telling a very clear story. Dale kept meticulous logs in a small pocket notebook, tracking operating hours against diesel fuel burned. Pulling a fully loaded cart through soft soils, the T8.390 averaged just under 6 gallons an hour, an 11% drop in fuel consumption compared to his older red workhorses performing the exact same duties. Over a full harvest season, that efficiency represented thousands of euros saved directly in fuel costs alone. Beyond the fuel savings, the physical toll on Dale's 71-year-old frame was dramatically reduced. The tractor's active front axle suspension worked in tandem with a fully isolated hydraulic cab suspension, floating over deep washouts and hard, rutted tracks that usually sent jarring shocks up an operator's spine. After 10 straight hours in the leather seat, Dale stepped out of the cab at night without the nagging lower back pain that had plagued him for a decade. While his neighbors watched from across the road, waiting for the blue machine to falter under the heavy strain of high-yield corn, the New Holland logged 70 continuous hours without missing a single beat, quietly working while the dust settled over the field. By late October, the steady grind of harvest began to expose the vulnerabilities of the local machinery fleet. In agriculture, high stress and long hours have a way of revealing every hidden mechanical weakness, and Randolph County was about to get a harsh lesson in modern equipment reliability. The trouble started right in the middle of a 400-acre cornfield belonging to Billy Schaefer. His 3-year-old, top-tier Massey Ferguson threw a severe transmission fault code right as the autumn weather was holding dry. The local dealership sent a field service technician out with a laptop to reflash the control modules. But 2 days later, the tractor ground to a complete halt with a burnt clutch pack. The machine was flatbed to the shop, leaving Billy down a major power unit for a full week and facing a bill that climbed past 14,000 euros for parts and shop labor. Within days, other local operations hit similar walls. Another neighbor down the road suffered a complete hydraulic pump lockup on his primary red tractor, starving the steering and implement systems of pressure. Across the township, a third operator saw his main machine sidelined for 8 critical days, waiting on a backordered electronic valve block to arrive from a regional distribution center. By the end of the second week of November, nearly half of the major red tractors in the immediate area had experienced at least one catastrophic stoppage, leaving frustrated farmers sitting idle in their yards while the weather window slowly began to close. Meanwhile, Dale's blue New Holland T8.390 kept rolling quietly through the dust. Day after day, it backed up to the grain cart, pulled heavy loads across rutted headlands, and rode back and forth to the grain legs without a single warning light on the digital dash. Dale checked the fluid levels every morning at 5:30, blew out the engine air filters on schedule, and kept moving dirt. By the time the calendar turned to November, the machine had logged nearly 180 continuous, trouble-free hours in the field. The smirks at the co-op had completely disappeared, replaced by a quiet, watchful curiosity. Neighbors who had previously driven past Dale's yard without looking now slowed their trucks to a crawl along the fence row, watching the blue tractor pull fully loaded grain carts through soft bottoms without slipping a tire. The talk of Randolph County was no longer about Dale's strange purchase, but about the red iron sitting in repair bays while the blue outsider kept working. In mid-November, an Arctic cold front swept out of the northern plains and slammed straight into southern Illinois. Temperatures plummeted overnight into the low 20s, freezing the soft topsoil into concrete and coating every exhaust stack in a heavy skim of white frost. Fields that had been muddy turned rock-hard within hours. It was a golden opportunity to finish harvest on solid ground, but the sudden freeze brought brutal operating conditions for high-horsepower equipment. Across Randolph County, the extreme cold triggered a cascade of mechanical nightmares for owners of newer machines. Modern Tier 4 final emission systems struggled in the freezing air. Diesel exhaust fluid, which freezes at 12 degrees Fahrenheit, gelled inside tank lines and heater elements. When internal heating circuits failed to thaw the lines quickly enough, electronic engine control units panicked, throwing severe emissions codes and plunging multi-100,000 euro tractors straight into 5-mile-per-hour limp mode. Billy Schaefer's late-model Massey Ferguson refused to run above idle 3 mornings in a row because a DEF quality sensor locked up in the cold. Across the grid, neighboring farmers lost precious days towing stalled machinery into heated shops just to clear computerized emission lockouts. While the modern fleet stood frozen in shed doorways, Dale's 2012 New Holland T8.390 proved the value of buying within a specific manufacturing sweet spot. Built in 2012, before the most restrictive Tier 4 final emissions guidelines and complex DEF heater networks were forced onto heavy equipment, the machine lacked the fragile exhaust hardware that crippled newer tractors. Every morning at 5:30, while stars were still visible in the frozen sky, Dale climbed into the cab, turned the key, and listened to the 8.7-liter FPT engine spin over and fire instantly on the first turn. There were no glowing warning lights, no DEF heater alarms, and no limp mode countdown timers on the display screen. Hydraulic fluid warmed up through the high-capacity pumps. The suspension smoothed out over the frozen ruts, and by 6 o'clock, Dale was already out in the field hauling grain. While his competitors sat in idling pickup trucks trying to thaw electronic sensors with heat guns, the blue workhorse cleared field after field without a single hesitation, turning the brutal freeze into the most productive stretch of Dale's entire harvest season. By November 18th, Dale recorded his final field hours in his pocket notebook, wiped down the dust from the cab windows, and parked his grain cart back in the equipment shed. Harvest on his 1,800 acres was completely wrapped up. Meanwhile, surrounding operations were drowning in delays. Billy Schaefer still had over 300 acres of corn standing in frozen ground, and 2 other neighbors down the road were managing hundreds of unharvested acres while fighting ongoing mechanical breakdowns and dealer back orders. On the morning of November 21st, Dale drove his pickup into town to pick up winterizing fluids at the local co-op. As he walked toward the counter, the door opened behind him and Billy Schaefer stepped inside. Billy looked exhausted, his eyelids heavy after working 18-hour shifts around equipment failures and freezing cold snaps. He stopped in his tracks when he saw Dale standing near the counter with a jug of anti-gel additive in hand. For a brief, tense moment, the room fell silent as the other locals present watched the 2 men. 2 months earlier, Billy had openly mocked Dale's purchase in this exact room. Billy stared at Dale, rubbed the back of his neck, and let out a long, heavy sigh. "How many hours did you put on that blue machine this fall?" Billy asked, his voice entirely devoid of its former edge. "Just shy of 320 hours, Dale answered evenly. "Didn't drop a drop of oil, didn't throw a code, didn't stop once." Billy nodded slowly, staring down at the concrete floor for a moment before looking back up with complete sincerity. I sat in a cold cab for 3 days straight waiting on service trucks, while my crops sat out in the freeze. Billy said quiet enough for only the counter room to hear. I should have raised my card at that dispersal sale instead of letting pride make a fool out of me. That blue machine was the best value on the block, and we were all too blind to see it. Dale didn't gloat, nor did he offer a sarcastic reply. He simply nodded respectfully, acknowledging the weight of Billy's words. The quiet confession from the county's largest operator spread through Randolph County like wildfire by noon, completely shattering the long-standing stigma against blue iron. By the time the calendar turned to January 2021, the story of Dale Hutchins's harvest had transformed from local gossip into agricultural legend across southern Illinois. Word of a 370-horsepower blue tractor logging over 300 brutal harvest hours without a single breakdown, while brand-new red machines sat stranded in shop bays, had traveled far beyond the county line. Farmers who had spent decades buying the exact same brand out of habit were suddenly re-evaluating their equipment strategies. The first real tremor of a market shift hit the regional machinery trade 60 miles east in Marion. Frank Russell, a veteran machinery dealer who had been managing a regional New Holland dealership for over 35 years, sat at his desk looking over an unprecedented stack of customer inquiry logs. For years, heavy blue iron had been a tough sell in a territory dominated by red legacy brands. High-horsepower T8 models often sat on his lot for 6 months to a year before finding a buyer, usually selling at steep discounts just to move inventory. On a cold Thursday morning in mid-January, Frank picked up the telephone and dialed Dale's home line. When Dale answered, Frank let out a warm laugh. "Dale, I don't know what kind of magic trick you pulled over there in Randolph County, but my sales floor has been out of control for 3 weeks straight. I've had 9 different large acreage operators walk in or call, every single one of them asking for clean, used T8.390S or T8.360S with auto command transmissions. And 4 of those guys explicitly dropped your name." Dale leaned back in his kitchen chair, smiling quietly into the receiver. "I didn't do anything special, Frank. I just bought a good tractor that didn't break down when the ground froze." "In this business, Dale, that's everything," Frank replied. By February, the ripple effect was visible on regional auction blocks. Used T8 series tractors that previously struggled to attract attention were suddenly surrounded by eager bidders. A clean 2011 T8.360 with 3,000 hours, which would have struggled to hit €70,000 18 months earlier, sold at a farm auction in neighboring Jackson County for a staggering €96,000. The narrative had completely inverted. The very same blue iron that farmers had once dismissed as a gamble was now viewed as a practical, heavy-duty solution. Dale hadn't just saved his own bottom line. He had single-handedly sparked a market reevaluation across 2 counties. In late March 2021, the local Massey Ferguson dealership held its annual Spring Customer Appreciation Show. It was a massive event designed to showcase shiny new high-horsepower iron, complete with factory representatives, line rows of immaculate tractors, free catered lunch, and promotional door prizes. Historically, Dale had attended every year, having spent 4 decades supporting the brand. But after making the switch to blue, he assumed showing up would only invite unwanted friction or awkward silence from longtime sales staff. That changed when Billy Schaefer called him personally on the Tuesday before the event. "You need to come down to the spring show, Dale," Billy said directly. When Dale asked why he'd want to park his truck at a red iron showcase, Billy didn't hesitate. "Because guys are tired of listening to sales brochures. They need to hear real-world numbers, and Doug Peterson needs to hear them too." Dale arrived around noon, walking onto the lot just as the lunch line was clearing. Heads turned immediately. The mood wasn't hostile. It was marked by genuine curiosity. Farmers standing around the polished hoods of new €300,000 machines stepped aside to greet him, asking quiet questions about his winter maintenance. Within minutes, Doug Peterson, the dealership's veteran sales manager, walked over and extended his hand with a wry smile. "Glad you made it, Dale," Doug said, stepping toward a quiet spot near a brand-new model on display. "Even if you're pulling into my lot with a different color mindset these days. Can I ask you a straight question? If you were signing a check today, Would you buy one of these new red units or stick with that blue machine? Dale looked Doug dead in the eye, without a trace of hostility. I'd buy the new Holland every single time, Doug. The price tag made the initial choice simple, but the engineering made it permanent. When a 10-year-old blue tractor outworks a 3-year-old machine at half the purchase price and zero downtime, loyalty stops making financial sense. Doug looked around at the pristine machines sitting on his lot, carrying price tags upward of 350,000 euros, and let out a soft nod. Our prices have gotten astronomical, and the emission systems are giving these guys fits. I can't argue with your math, Dale. The conversation stuck with Doug because he knew Dale was right. For decades, the dealership had relied on inherited brand loyalty to drive sales. But as customer frustration over repair bills and modern sensor breakdowns boiled over, performance metrics were replacing nostalgia. By the end of the afternoon, half a dozen local producers had confronted the sales team with the same hard truth. If brand new red iron couldn't guarantee field uptime, they were going to start looking for alternatives that could. April brought warm winds and dry topsoil, signaling the start of spring planting across Randolph County. Dale hooked the blue New Holland T8.390 to his heavy 16-row planter, dialing in the hydraulic down pressure and setting the auto command transmission for a steady 6 miles per hour. The long wheelbase and balanced weight distribution of the T8 proved its worth once again, carrying the planter through damp, low-lying terraces without creating deep wheel ruts or compacting the seedbed. Word of the tractor's flawless harvest run had spread, and now neighboring farmers wanted to see how the blue workhorse handled spring tillage and planting. Driveway visits became a daily occurrence at Dale's farm. Operators who had once driven past without looking now pulled their pickup trucks right up to the end rows, waiting for Dale to turn around so they could inspect the machine up close. They peered under the hood, climbed up into the cab to check the control layout, and asked detailed questions about fuel consumption, hydraulic flow rates, and routine service requirements. Dale hid nothing. He pulled out his pocket notebooks, showing them the exact numbers. An 11% drop in fuel burn compared to his old machinery, zero oil consumption, smooth transmission response under heavy drawbar pull, and a complete absence of sensor glitches or electrical faults. He explained how the 8.7-liter FPT engine delivered maximum torque at low engine speeds, keeping operating costs low without sacrificing power. One prominent local producer, Tom Briggs, who farmed 2,400 acres with 2 high-horsepower red tractors, spent over an hour walking around the T8.390 as it sat at the edge of a cornfield. Tom had suffered severe downtime the previous harvest due to electronic sensor lockouts, and was looking for a reliable way to protect his operation from future delays. Impressed by the hard data and Dale's first-hand experience, Tom drove straight to the New Holland dealership in Marion 3 weeks later and purchased a clean 2013 T8.360. Tom wasn't the only one. Over the next 2 months, 5 additional large-scale operators in Randolph County followed suit, acquiring clean, used blue tractors to strengthen their fleets. What had started as a single $87,000 auction purchase by an independent 71-year-old farmer had officially turned into a regional wave, quietly breaking the local red monopoly one farm at a time. By July 2021, the dramatic shift in Randolph County's machinery landscape had caught the attention of regional agricultural media. A senior staff writer from a prominent Midwestern farming publication contacted Dale, eager to write a feature story on how a single operator had triggered a major brand migration away from a decades-long red iron monopoly. The reporter wanted to frame Dale as a visionary trendsetter who had challenged corporate brand dominance and rewritten the local equipment rulebook. Dale politely but firmly declined the interview. He explained that he hadn't set out to start a movement, make a political statement, or embarrass local equipment dealers. He was simply a working farmer who had made a practical dollars and cents business decision based on purchase price, machine engineering, and operational survival. In Dale's mind, the headline wasn't about his personal foresight. It was about the simple fact that modern farming leaves zero margin for expensive equipment downtime, and operators will naturally gravitate toward whatever iron keeps their operation moving. While Dale avoided the spotlight, his farm financial ledgers continued to deliver undeniable proof. As the summer months wrapped up and the mid-year accounting was tallied, the operational metrics spoke with crystal clarity. Over the preceding 12 months, including a full harvest season and spring planting stretch, Dale's total maintenance expenditure on the blue New Holland T8.390 amounted to precisely €2,340. Every single cent of that total went into routine preventive care, engine oil, factory filters, grease, and fluid analysis sampling. In stark contrast, neighboring operations running modern fleets were staring at staggering repair bills. Between transmission overhauls, DEF heater replacements, sensor replacements, and dealer field service labor charges, several local farmers had logged maintenance and repair expenses exceeding €18,000 on single machines. When factored across full operational budgets, the difference in machine reliability represented tens of thousands of euros saved, providing Dale with an unassailable financial cushion. The numbers proved beyond any doubt that in modern agriculture, raw field performance and mechanical simplicity will always triumph over brand loyalty. In January 2022, Dale did something that completely eliminated any lingering doubts about his machinery strategy. He traveled back to a major winter consignment auction in central Illinois, keeping a sharp eye on the equipment registry. Sitting on the catalog list was another clean blue machine, a 2014 New Holland T8.360 featuring an auto-command continuously variable transmission and just 3,100 hours on the clock. When the tractor rolled up to the auction block, the room felt entirely different than it had 16 months earlier. There were no smirks, no knowing chuckles, and no long, uncomfortable silences. Several regional buyers raised their bidding cards, pushing the price steadily upward as the auctioneer called the numbers. But Dale had done his math weeks in advance. He knew the maintenance history, understood the reliability of the FPT engine platform, and recognized the exact value the machine would bring to his 1,800 acres. When the bidding reached €102,000, Dale raised his card one last time, securing the winning bid. It was still an exceptional value for a 300 horsepower CVT workhorse, even if the price reflected the growing regional demand for used blue iron. As Dale loaded the T8.360 onto the transport trailer and brought it back to Randolph County, the local response was immediate. Nobody called him to mock the purchase, and nobody asked if he was worried about finding replacement parts. The local farming community recognized the acquisition for exactly what it was: a calculated, ruthless commitment to operational efficiency. By adding a second blue tractor to his shed, Dale effectively doubled down on his business model. He now ran a fully integrated, low-overhead machinery fleet capable of handling heavy tillage, planting, and grain cart duties without carrying massive equipment debt or risking catastrophic downtime. Neighboring producers who stopped by his shop to inspect the second acquisition saw a man who had completely liberated his farm from the trap of emotional brand loyalty. Dale's strategy was clear, simple, and entirely focused on return on investment. By high-tier engineering at bottom-tier pricing, run rigorous preventive maintenance, and let the results in the field speak for themselves. By May 2022, the financial reality of equipment downtime had hit the regional Massey Ferguson dealership with devastating force. Over the previous 18 months, 11 major farming accounts across Randolph County had officially migrated away from red machinery, shifting their primary power purchases toward used blue iron. These weren't small-time hobbyists. They were large acreage producers managing thousands of acres of corn and soybeans. The cause wasn't aggressive marketing by competing dealers, but the sheer frustration of recurring field failures, gelled emission sensors, expensive dealer bills, and wasted harvest days spent waiting on field technicians. Doug Peterson, the dealership sales manager, watched his quarterly sales reports decline while his shop bays remained packed with newer red machines undergoing complex electrical and hydraulic overhauls. The long-standing red monopoly in Randolph County was officially fractured, and every conversation on the sales floor seemed to circle back to the exact same origin point. The 71-year-old farmer who had bought a discounted blue tractor at auction and run it for 2 full seasons without a single mechanical delay. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon in mid-May, Doug picked up his phone and called Dale. After a few minutes of polite conversation about planting progress and field conditions, Doug cleared his throat and made an offer that would have seemed completely unthinkable 2 years earlier. "Dale, I want to make you a serious business proposition," Doug said evenly. "I want to buy your original 2012 New Holland T8.390. I'll write you a check for €95,000 today, 8,000 more than you paid for it at auction 2 years ago. I want to park that machine right in the front row of my dealership lot so every customer who comes in complaining about equipment value can see the exact tractor that turned this county upside down." Dale listened quietly, letting out a soft, amused laugh before responding. "That's a generous offer, Doug, and I appreciate the honesty behind it. But that blue machine isn't for sale at any price. It's currently hooked up to my 16-row planter, and it's going to haul my grain cart come October. It's far too valuable to my daily farming operation to let it sit on a sales lot as a curiosity piece." Doug sighed, but he couldn't hide the respect in his voice. "I figured you'd say that, Dale. But if you ever change your mind, you know where to find me." Dale thanked him, hung up the phone, and looked out his window toward the machine shed. The blue tractor had proven something far greater than resale value. It was living proof that in modern agriculture, performance will always matter more than paint. If you drive down Route 150 through Randolph County today, you will see a landscape that looks fundamentally different than it did a few years ago. Bright blue New Holland tractors work comfortably alongside the traditional red machinery, pulling heavy tillage tools, planting precision rows, and hauling grain carts through harvest dust. What was once considered an isolated fluke or a strange gamble by an aging farmer has officially established a new operating standard across the region. The deep-rooted brand monopoly that governed local agricultural equipment for over half a century has dissolved, replaced by a sharp focus on engineering quality, real-world uptime, and bottom-line profit margins. Dale Hutchkins still farms his 1,800 acres, rising before dawn every morning to check fluid levels and grease fittings in his machine shed. He runs his 2 blue tractors side by side through the spring heat and autumn frost, logging hundreds of trouble-free hours each season while keeping his operational overhead at a fraction of the county average. When he pulls into the local co-op for parts or pulls up to the grain elevator leg with a loaded trailer, the smirks and sarcastic comments are long gone. Neighboring operators ask him about fluid analysis reports, hydraulic flow capacities, and transmission settings, treating the 71-year-old not as an outcast, but as a practical authority on machinery management. The story of the Blue T8.390 isn't about paint colors or dealership feuds. It's a testament to the power of independent thinking in an industry built on costly tradition. An €87,000 auction risk proved that ironclad brand loyalty means nothing if a machine leaves you stranded in a frozen field, and that true value is measured strictly in hours logged without downtime. In modern farming, performance isn't subjective, and the tractor everyone initially laughed at eventually became the standard every operator wished they had bought. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more deep-dive rural machinery narratives. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below on whether brand loyalty still matters on the modern farm.